The barrel of the revolver glinted in the harsh midday sun, unwavering in Ravenhawk's steady hand. Dust swirled around them on the main street of Copper Creek, the onlookers frozen in a tableau of fear and fascination. Meadow Eagle stared down the dark hollow of the gun's muzzle, her breath caught in her throat, but her eyes remained defiant. "Tell me where the treasure is," Ravenhawk demanded, his voice low and dangerous, "or both you and this white man die today." Behind her, Elias Blackwood stood with his hands slightly raised, his weathered face betraying no fear despite the blood trickling from his temple. The silence stretched between them like a drawn bowstring. Meadow's fingers moved slowly to the bone necklace around her throat, the mark of shame her tribe had forced upon her. Her touch was gentle, reverent almost. In that moment, a memory flickered in her eyes, a realization dawning across her face. "You wouldn't understand what this truly is," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Raven's finger tightened on the trigger. "But I'll show you." 3 months earlier. The drums pounded like a heartbeat in the Apache camp, their rhythm matching the thundering in Meadow Eagle's chest, as 2 warriors dragged her toward the central fire. The orange flames leapt high into the night sky, casting long shadows across the faces of her people who had once been family, but now looked at her with contempt and fear. 3 years of drought had withered the land around them. The game had grown scarce, the waterholes had dried up, and children cried from hunger in the night. In their desperation for answers, they had found her. Meadow was 20 years old, but felt ancient, as she stood barefoot on the hard-packed earth, her long black hair tangled around her shoulders. She wore a simple buckskin dress that couldn't hide the fullness of her chest, the physical attribute that had become the focus of their suspicion and hatred. Stone Crow, the tribal elder, stepped forward. His face was deeply lined like the cracked desert floor, and his eyes reflected the fire's glow as he surveyed her. 60 summers had bent his back, but not his will. The eagle feather in his gray hair trembled as he raised his hands to silence the crowd. "The spirits are angry," he proclaimed, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "Our children hunger. Our warriors find no game. Our women bear no children. And in our midst stands the cause." Meadow's jaw tightened, but she kept her face impassive. To show fear was to admit guilt. To cry out was to confirm their accusations. She had learned long ago to wear a mask of stone when facing their judgment. "Look at her," Stone Crow continued, gesturing toward her body. "Formed unnaturally cursed by the spirits bringing the shadow of death upon our people. The daughter of impure blood." The words stung, though she had heard them before, whispered behind hands muttered as she passed. Her mixed heritage had always set her apart, the legacy of her mother's love for a white trader. But never before had the accusations been so public, so formal. A woman stepped forward, her face twisted with grief. "My child died 3 moons ago." She sickened after Meadow Eagle looked upon her. Others murmured in agreement, the collective fear feeding upon itself. "My crops withered when she walked past my field," a man called out. "The stream dried where she bathed," added another. Stone Crow nodded gravely at each accusation, as though each confirmed what he already knew. Then he motioned to 2 young warriors. They approached Meadow, and one roughly pulled the blanket from her shoulders, leaving her in only her dress. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. The second warrior held a small clay pot. He dipped his fingers into it and drew lines of white ash across Meadow's forehead, down her cheeks, across her collarbone. The ash felt cold against her skin, symbolic of the death they believed she brought. "The mark of the Cursed One," Stone Crow intoned. Meadow's heart pounded, but still she did not speak. What defense could she offer against superstition, against fear? An older warrior approached with something in his hands, a necklace made of small animal bones strung together. With ceremonial slowness, he placed it around her neck. The bones felt cold against her skin, their weight insignificant, yet somehow crushing. "The sign of shame," Stone Crow declared, "so all may know her for what she is." Meadow's eyes searched the crowd looking for a single sympathetic face, finding none. Even those who had once smiled at her now looked away. Fear had consumed them all. Then Ravenhawk stepped into the firelight. He was tall for an Apache man, with broad shoulders and a face that betrayed little emotion. His eyes, however, burned with an intensity that had always unsettled Meadow. He had pursued her for years, his advances becoming increasingly insistent, until she had finally refused him publicly several months ago. "What shall be done with her?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of authority beyond his 25 years. Stone Crow looked up at the star-filled sky, as though consulting with powers beyond their understanding. When he looked back at the tribe, his decision was made. When the sun rises, she will be cleansed by fire. Her spirit will return to the earth, and the curse will be lifted from our people. A cold horror washed over Meadow, breaking through her carefully maintained composure. Death by fire. The most painful end they could imagine. The crowd's approval rose like a wave relief, flooding their faces at the prospect of an end to their suffering. Two warriors gripped Meadow's arms and began dragging her toward a small, isolated hut at the edge of the camp, the place where they kept those awaiting judgment or death. As they pulled her away, she caught Ravenhawk's eyes. There was something in them she couldn't decipher. Not quite triumph, not quite regret. Something else. Inside the hut, the warriors bound her wrists with rawhide strips and tied them to a center post. One warrior pushed her roughly to her knees. "The cursed one kneels at last," he said with satisfaction, before they left, securing the entrance behind them. Alone in the darkness, Meadow finally allowed herself to tremble. Death waited with the dawn only hours away. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the bone necklace against her throat, the symbol of her supposed corruption. Through a small gap in the hut's wall, a shaft of moonlight fell across her face. She turned toward it, like a flower seeking the sun, drawing what comfort she could from its cold, distant light. The moon had been full the night her mother died 2 years ago. White Dove had been beautiful once, with gentle hands and a voice that could soothe even the angriest spirit. But illness had taken her swiftly, leaving Meadow truly alone in the tribe that had tolerated her only because of her mother's standing. In the stillness, memory washed over her White Dove, sitting beside her under the stars, teaching her the old stories, the true Apache ways. "Never forget who you are," her mother had whispered. "Your blood is not a curse, but a blessing. You carry 2 worlds within you." The last night, as fever claimed her mother, White Dove had pressed something into Meadow's hand, the very bone necklace that Stone Crow had placed around her neck tonight. But when her mother had given it to her, it had been with reverence, not shame. "Keep this always," White Dove had whispered, her breath rattling in her chest. "Never lose it. It is the key to the truth." Before Meadow could ask what truth she meant, her mother's eyes had closed for the final time. Meadow had kept the necklace hidden, sensing its importance, though not understanding it. Now, by cruel coincidence, it had become her mark of shame. She touched it gently, feeling each small bone between her fingers, wondering at its secret meaning. The rawhide bindings cut into her wrists as she shifted position. The pain brought her back to her present reality. She was hours from death unless she found a way to escape. Determination hardened within her like clay in fire. She would not die like this, condemned for something she could not help, for being who she was. She would not kneel before their fear and hatred. Twisting her body, she managed to reach a sharp stone embedded in the dirt floor. With painful slowness, she worked it free and began sawing at the rawhide binding her wrists. The stone's edge was dull, and progress was agonizingly slow. Blood seeped from her wrists where the bindings cut deeper as she worked. But she persisted. "I will not die by their judgment," she whispered to herself, the mantra giving strength to her efforts. "I will not die for their fear." Outside, she could hear the continued drumming, the sounds of the tribe preparing for tomorrow's ceremony, her execution. The knowledge spurred her efforts, adding desperation to determination. After what seemed like hours, the rawhide finally gave way. Meadow rubbed her raw wrists, biting back a cry of pain. She had freed her hands, but escape would not be easy. A guard would be posted outside, and the camp would be alert for any attempt to flee. She crept to the small gap in the wall where the moonlight entered, peering out. The guard sat several paces away, his back against a tree, his head nodding as sleep threatened to overcome him. Beyond him lay the darkness of the desert, and somewhere, freedom. Meadow returned to the center of the hut and began digging at the base of the wall where the branches and mud seemed weakest. Each sound she made seemed thunderous in her ears, but the distant drums covered the noise. Slowly, a gap formed barely large enough for her to squeeze through. She paused, listening. The guard's breathing had deepened, suggesting he had succumbed to sleep. It was now or never. Meadow pushed herself through the opening, ignoring the scrape of rough branches against her skin. Outside, the cool night air hit her like a blessing. She crouched in the shadows, heart pounding so loudly she feared it would wake the sleeping guard. The camp spread before her, fires burning low, most of the tribe now asleep, except for those still drumming and dancing around the central fire. Her path to freedom lay in the opposite direction, toward the darkness of the desert. Moving with the silence her mother had taught her, Meadow crept away from the hut, staying in the deepest shadows. Each step carried her further from the camp, closer to survival. When she reached the edge of the firelight's reach, she paused for one last look at the place that had been her home. "Goodbye," she whispered, not to the people but to her mother's memory, to the life she had known, to the girl she had been. Then she turned and ran. The desert opened before her, vast and unforgiving, under the moonlight. Meadow ran with the desperation of one pursued by death itself. Her bare feet struck the hard ground rocks, cutting into her skin, but she did not slow. Pain was preferable to the fire that awaited her at dawn. She had no clear destination, only the instinct to put as much distance as possible between herself and the tribe. The stars guided her vaguely eastward toward the river that lay a night's journey away. If she could reach water, she might survive long enough to figure out what came next. The night deepened around her. Coyotes called in the distance, their eerie howls raising the hair on her arms. The desert was alive with dangers, snakes, scorpions, the great cats that prowled the hills, but none terrified her as much as what lay behind. Hours passed. Meadow's legs burned with fatigue, her throat parched with thirst. Still, she pushed on, pausing only briefly to catch her breath before continuing her flight. The moon arced across the sky, marking the passage of time, the approach of dawn. When the first hint of gray touched the eastern horizon, fear gave her renewed strength. Somewhere behind her, the tribe would be awakening, preparing for her execution, discovering her absence. The pursuit would begin soon. As if summoned by her thoughts, she heard a sound that froze her blood, a distant call carried on the pre-dawn breeze. Someone had discovered her escape. Meadow pushed her exhausted body even harder, ignoring the stabbing pain in her side, the burning in her lungs. The landscape began to change subtly, the flat desert giving way to gentle rolls, scattered vegetation appearing more frequently. She was nearing the river. The sun broke over the horizon just as Meadow crested a small rise. Below her, the river glinted like polished silver in the early light, a promise of life and hope. With the last of her strength, she half ran, half stumbled down the slope toward the water. At the riverbank, she fell to her knees, plunging her hands into the cool current. She drank deeply, the water reviving her parched body. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe she might survive. Then a voice shattered her fragile hope. "Did you think you could truly escape?" Meadow whirled around, still on her knees. Ravenhawk stood several paces away, alone, his silhouette, dark against the rising sun. He had followed her, somehow tracking her through the night. Panic flooded her veins. She was too exhausted to run further, too far from help to scream. This was where her flight ended, not by fire but by Ravenhawk's hand. Yet as he stepped closer, his expression was not what she expected. There was no triumph, no cruelty. Instead, his face held something that looked almost like concern. "You should run," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Keep going east. I'll tell them I lost your trail." Meadow stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you help me?" A shadow passed over his features. "Because Stone Crow is wrong. And because—" He hesitated. "Just go. Quickly. I'll find you later." Before she could question him further, the distant sound of voices reached them. The search party was drawing closer. "Go!" Ravenhawk hissed, turning back toward the voices. Confused but desperate, Meadow scrambled to her feet and plunged into the river. The cold water shocked her system, giving her one last surge of energy. She waded across the current, tugging at her dress, then clambered up the opposite bank and into the brush beyond. As she disappeared into the vegetation, she glanced back once. Ravenhawk stood watching her, a solitary figure against the dawn sky. Then he turned away, heading back toward the approaching search party, and Meadow continued her desperate flight. The sun climbed higher as Meadow pushed eastward, following the river's course. The day grew hot, the unrelenting sun beating down on her already exhausted body. Her wet dress clung to her skin, then slowly dried in the heat. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she had no time to forage for food. By midday, her vision began to blur. Each step became a monumental effort. The bone necklace felt heavier with each passing hour, though its physical weight was negligible. It was the weight of what it represented, her tribe's rejection, her mother's final mystery, her uncertain future. When she finally collapsed, it was at the edge of a small clearing. As consciousness slipped away, she was vaguely aware of hoofbeats approaching, of a shadow falling across her face, of rough but gentle hands lifting her. Her last thought, before darkness claimed her, was of her mother's words, "Never lose it. It is the key to the truth." The first thing Meadow became aware of was the absence of pain. After so much suffering, the relief was so profound that for a moment she wondered if she had died. Then other sensations filtered through the softness beneath her, the smell of wood smoke and coffee, the sound of a fire crackling nearby. She opened her eyes slowly. She lay on a bed in a small rustic cabin. A wool blanket covered her, and someone had dressed her wounds. The bone necklace still hung around her throat. Whoever had rescued her had left it untouched. Cautiously, Meadow pushed herself up on her elbows, wincing at the soreness in her muscles. The cabin was simply furnished a table with 2 chairs, a small cook stove, shelves lined with books and jars, and the bed where she lay. Through the window she could see it was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across a yard bordered by a split-rail fence. The door opened, and Meadow tensed, ready to flee, despite her weakness. A man entered, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that suggested he was around 40. A jagged scar ran from his right temple to his jaw, giving him a fearsome appearance despite the gentleness in his blue-gray eyes. He carried a bucket of water and started slightly when he saw she was awake. "You're back with the living," he said, his voice deep but quiet, as though unused to speaking. He set the bucket down and maintained a respectful distance. "Been out since I found you yesterday." Meadow watched him warily. She had little experience with white men, and what she did know wasn't reassuring. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse from thirst. "Elias Blackwood." He poured water from a pitcher into a cup and approached slowly, offering it to her at arm's length. "This is my land you collapsed on." Meadow accepted the water, drinking deeply before asking, "Why did you help me?" Elias shrugged one shoulder, moving to stoke the fire.
"Wouldn't leave anyone today in the sun, Apache or otherwise."
The casual acknowledgement of her heritage surprised her. She looked down at herself, realizing she wore a man's shirt over her dress far too large for her frame. "Hope you don't mind the shirt," Elias said, noticing her examination. "Your dress was torn up pretty bad. I've got some of my late wife's things. Might fit you better." "Thank you," Meadow said cautiously. "I'm Meadow Eagle." Elias nodded once, acknowledgement without prying. "You hungry?" Only then did Meadow realize how famished she was. She nodded, and Elias moved to the stove, stirring something in a pot that smelled of meat and herbs. His movements were efficient, but contained, as though he held himself under tight control. As he worked, Meadow took the opportunity to study him more closely. His clothes were simple, but well-maintained. A cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle, dark trousers, worn boots. His light brown hair was streaked with gray at the temples and cut short military style. Everything about him spoke of discipline and solitude. "Your land is far from others," she observed, breaking the silence. "That's why I chose it." He spooned stew into a bowl and brought it to her again, keeping his distance. 10 miles to the nearest neighbor. 20 to town. Isolation both a danger and a protection for her. Meadow accepted the bowl with murmured thanks and began eating, the rich flavors exploding on her tongue after days of nothing. "Why were you running?" Elias asked bluntly, seating himself in a chair several feet from the bed. Meadow hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. "My tribe believes I'm cursed. They wanted to purify me." Understanding darkened Elias's eyes. "Kill you, you mean?" She nodded, focusing on her food. "Because you're half white?" he asked, his perception surprising her again. "Partly, and because—" She gestured vaguely at her body, uncomfortable with the explanation. "People fear what's different," Elias said simply. "White folks ain't no better at it than anyone else." They fell silent as Meadow finished her meal. When she had done, Elias took the bowl and set it aside. "You can stay until you're strong enough to travel," he said. "No one comes here, so you'll be safe for a while. After that—" He let the sentence hang unfinished. "Thank you," Meadow said again, meaning it. Whatever his reasons, this stranger had saved her life. Elias nodded and rose, gathering his hat from a hook by the door. "Got chores to finish before dark. Rest. There's more water in the pitcher." He left as quietly as he had entered, leaving Meadow alone with her thoughts and the crackling fire. Despite her caution, exhaustion soon pulled her back into sleep, the first peaceful rest she had known in days. When she woke again, night had fallen. A lamp burned low on the table, casting soft light across the cabin. Elias sat in the chair reading a book, his scarred profile illuminated by the glow. Meadow shifted, and his eyes immediately lifted from the page. "Need something?" "No," she said. "Thank you for the bed. I can sleep on the floor now that I'm awake." Elias shook his head. "Keep the bed. I'm used to the chair." Meadow frowned. "This is your home. I can't take your bed." A hint of amusement touched his eyes. "Already made up my mind. Arguing won't change it." His stubbornness matched her own. Meadow subsided, recognizing the futility of the debate. Instead, she looked around the cabin more carefully. On a shelf near the door stood a small wooden horse, hand-carved and painted. Beside it, a rag doll sat propped against a tin soldier. Children's toys carefully preserved. And on the wall hung a framed sketch of a beautiful woman with dark hair and eyes, her smile capturing a warmth that seemed to reach across time. Following her gaze, Elias's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "My wife?" he said, his voice rougher than before. "Isabella." "She's beautiful," Meadow said softly. "Was." The single word contained volumes of pain. "Yellow fever. Took her and our boy, Thomas. 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." The inadequacy of the words hung in the air between them. Elias closed his book with deliberate care. "It's late. Try to get some more rest." He blew out the lamp, leaving only the firelight to illuminate the cabin. In the shadows, Meadow watched as he settled back in the chair, his eyes reflecting the flames, seeing something far beyond the confines of the small room. She recognized that look. It was the same one she saw in her own reflection, the gaze of someone who carried ghosts. The next morning, Meadow woke to find the cabin empty. Sunlight streamed through the windows and birds called outside. She rose carefully, testing her strength. Her body ached, but the worst of her exhaustion had passed. The floor was cool against her bare feet as she moved to the window. Outside stretched a small ranch, a barn, a corral with 3 horses, a garden plot, and, beyond, rolling grassland leading to distant hills. It was beautiful in its simplicity, a pocket of order carved from wilderness. On a chair near the bed she found clothes folded neatly, a simple dress, undergarments, even a pair of worn but serviceable boots. All had clearly belonged to Elias's wife, Isabella. Meadow touched them, hesitantly, feeling like an intruder in another woman's life. After washing with water from the bucket Elias had brought, she dressed carefully. The clothes fit reasonably well, though Isabella had been somewhat shorter. The dress was of faded blue cotton, simple but well made, with small flowers embroidered around the collar. When she stepped outside, she found Elias in the corral working with a young horse. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man. His gestures calm and assured as he led the animal through a training exercise. He glanced up as she approached, nodding in acknowledgement. "Clothes fit all right?" he asked, keeping his voice even so as not to startle the horse. "Yes, thank you." Meadow remained outside the fence watching. "I don't want to impose on your kindness longer than necessary." Elias patted the horse's neck before exiting the corral, latching the gate behind him. "Where would you go?" The blunt question struck Meadow silent. She had no destination, no plan beyond escape. "Thought so," Elias said, not unkindly. "Stay until you figure it out. I could use the help around here anyway." "You don't know me," Meadow said, confused by his continued generosity. Elias wiped his hands on a cloth tucked into his belt. "Know enough. You're in trouble." Seems like you didn't do anything to deserve it. He glanced at her, then away. Besides, place has been too quiet since— He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. The ghosts of his wife and son hung in the air between them. I'll earn my keep, Meadow promised, touched by the gruff offer. And so began a strange partnership. As days passed, Meadow regained her strength and began helping around the ranch. She tended the garden, prepared meals, mended clothes, tasks her mother had taught her that translated easily to this new environment. Elias worked from dawn to dusk, tending his small herd of cattle, training horses, repairing fences, the endless work of a rancher. They spoke little at first, existing in parallel sharing space, but not thoughts. Elias was a man of few words, and Meadow had learned caution early in life. But gradually, small conversations emerged about the weather, the animals, the work to be done. Never about the past, never about the future. Only the present, safe in its immediacy. A week passed this way, then another. Meadow found herself watching Elias when he wasn't aware, trying to piece together the puzzle of this scarred, solitary man who had opened his home to a stranger. He was unfailingly respectful, maintaining distance, never asking the questions that must have burned in his mind about her flight, and the bone necklace she refused to remove. In turn, she sensed his gaze on her, sometimes curious but restrained. There was no threat in it, only a searching quality, as though he, too, was trying to reconcile the mystery of her presence in his ordered existence. On the 10th day, as Meadow hung laundry to dry in the warm sun, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Fear shot through her like lightning. She dropped the sheet she had been hanging and ran toward the cabin, her heart pounding. Elias emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, his posture alert but not yet alarmed. He positioned himself between Meadow and the approaching rider. "Get inside," he said quietly. "If there's trouble, go out the back and take the bay horse. He's saddled." Meadow hesitated, unwilling to bring danger to this man who had shown her nothing but kindness. "Go," Elias insisted, not looking at her. She retreated to the cabin but remained near the window, watching as a lone rider appeared on the ridge. Even at a distance, she recognized the straight-backed figure, the distinctive headband. Raven Hawk had found her. Elias stood his ground as the rider approached, rifle held casually but ready. Meadow's hands trembled as she watched the two men size each other up. Elias solid as an oak, Raven Hawk lithe as a willow, each dangerous in his own way. "This is private property," Elias called when Raven Hawk was within earshot. The Apache rider reined in his horse several yards away. "I seek a woman, Meadow Eagle. She is here." It wasn't a question. Somehow Raven Hawk had tracked her across miles of wilderness to this isolated ranch. Meadow's blood ran cold at the implications. If he had found her, others could too. "What business do you have with her?" Elias asked, his voice revealing nothing. Raven Hawk's dark eyes flicked to the cabin window where Meadow stood half hidden. "Important business. Not for your ears, white man." Elias didn't move. "Any business with her goes through me first." A tense silence stretched between them. Then, unexpectedly, Raven Hawk dismounted. He left his weapons on his horse, a gesture of peace, but one that didn't entirely reassure Meadow. She had seen him take down a deer with his bare hands. "I come alone," Raven Hawk said, hands slightly raised to show they were empty. "I mean no harm to Meadow Eagle." Elias's posture remained wary. "Let her decide if she wants to speak with you." Meadow took a deep breath, steeling herself. Then she stepped out of the cabin into the sunlight. Raven Hawk's eyes immediately found her, his expression unreadable. "Why are you here?" she asked, stopping beside Elias, drawing strength from his solid presence. Ravenhawk's gaze moved between them, assessing. "I told you I would find you later. We must speak." He glanced at Elias. "Alone." "Anything you have to say can be said in front of him," Meadow replied, surprising herself with her firmness. A flicker of what might have been respect crossed Ravenhawk's face. "Very well. Stone Crow has gathered warriors. They search for you even now." "Why did you help me escape?" Meadow demanded the question that had burned in her mind since that dawn by the river. Ravenhawk's jaw tightened. "Because the judgment was wrong. You are not cursed." "Yet you stood with Stone Crow that night," she accused. "You watched them put this around my neck." She touched the bone necklace. "I had my reasons." His eyes held something she couldn't decipher. "But now things have changed. Stone Crow doesn't just want you anymore. He wants what you know." Confusion furrowed Meadow's brow. "What I know, I don't understand." "The gold," Ravenhawk said simply. "He believes you know where it is hidden." "Gold." Meadow looked to Elias, whose expression had sharpened at the word. "I know nothing of any gold." Ravenhawk took a step closer, stopping when Elias tensed. "Your father stole it 20 years ago, before you were born." The mention of her father, a man she had never known a shadow in her life, struck Meadow like a physical blow. "My father, William Fletcher," Ravenhawk said, watching her closely. "The white trader who gave you your blue eyes and cursed body." Elias's gaze flicked to Meadow, something like recognition flickering across his features. "How would I know anything about gold my father might have stolen?" Meadow demanded, anger rising to cover her confusion. "I never even knew him." "Stone Crow believes your mother told you," Ravenhawk explained, "or left you some sign. That is why he fears you, not because you are cursed, but because you might know his secret." "What secret?" Meadow's head spun with these revelations. Ravenhawk's voice lowered. "That Stone Crow helped your father steal the gold. That he betrayed his own brother, my uncle, who died trying to stop them." The pieces began to fall into place. Stone Crow's particular hatred for her, his determination to see her dead, the whispers that followed her throughout her life. It had never been about her mixed blood or her body. It had been fear that she might somehow expose a 20-year-old crime. "I know nothing about any gold," she repeated, her voice hollow with shock. Ravenhawk studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But Stone Crow will not believe that. He will hunt you until he is certain." "Why are you telling me this?" Meadow asked. "Why not simply capture me and take me back? Because I want justice, not more bloodshed," Ravenhawk said simply. "My uncle deserves the truth to be known. The tribe deserves to have what was stolen returned." Elias, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "How do we know this isn't a trick to get her to go back with you?" Ravenhawk's gaze shifted to him. "You don't, but ask yourself why I came alone if I meant to capture her." It was a fair point. If Ravenhawk had wanted to take her by force, he would have brought others or attempted to surprise them. "What do you want from me?" Meadow asked, still struggling to absorb these revelations about her past. "Help me find the gold," Ravenhawk said. "Help me expose Stone Crow's treachery. Help me bring justice to my uncle's memory." The request hung in the air between them, weighty with implications. Meadow touched the bone necklace at her throat, wondering suddenly if it held more significance than she had ever imagined. Was this what her mother had meant when she called it the key to the truth? "I need time to think," she said finally. Ravenhawk nodded. "Time is short. Stone Crow's warriors search in an ever-widening circle. They will find this place eventually. He glanced at Elias. And they will not ask questions before they attack. The threat was clear not just to her, but to Elias as well. Meadow felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Her presence had brought danger to the man who had saved her life. "I'll return in 2 days," Ravenhawk said, moving back toward his horse. "By then, you must decide." He mounted in one fluid motion, gathering the reins. Before turning to leave, he fixed Meadow with a penetrating stare. "The necklace you wear, it was not always a sign of shame. Ask your white man what the pattern means." With that cryptic statement, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, leaving Meadow and Elias standing in a silence heavy with unasked questions. When Ravenhawk had disappeared over the ridge, Elias lowered his rifle and turned to Meadow. "You'd better come inside. Seems we have things to discuss." His voice held no accusation, but Meadow felt a pang of guilt nonetheless. Her past had followed her, threatening the peace of this place and the man who had offered her sanctuary. Inside the cabin, Elias built up the fire, though the day was warm. The familiar routine seemed to steady him as Meadow sat at the table, her mind still reeling from Ravenhawk's revelations. "Did you know," she asked finally, "about my father, the gold?" Elias set the poker aside and turned to face her, his expression grave. Not until he mentioned the name, William Fletcher. He drew a deep breath. "I've heard that name before." "From where?" Meadow leaned forward, eager for any information about the father she had never known. Elias's gaze was distant, as though looking into the past. 15 years ago, I was riding fence on my first ranch down near the Mexican border. Found a man half dead in a gully. He'd been shot, was bleeding out." He paused, the memory clearly vivid. He knew he was dying, started talking, confessing things. "My father," Meadow whispered. Elias nodded. "He said his name was William Fletcher. Said he'd done terrible things. Mentioned gold and blood and betrayal." His eyes focused on Meadow again. "I tried to save him, but the wounds were too severe. He died there, holding my arm, begging forgiveness from someone named White Dove." "My mother," Meadow said, her voice barely audible. The knowledge that her father had thought of her mother in his final moments stirred something deep within her. Not quite grief, for how could she grieve a man she had never known, but a complex ache for what might have been. "Did he say anything about the gold, where it might be hidden?" she asked. Elias shook his head. "Nothing specific, just that it was where the eagle watches over the water. I assumed it was fever talk." He hesitated. "There's something else. He had a mark on him, a small tattoo on his shoulder. An eagle with outstretched wings." Meadow's hand went to her own shoulder, where beneath the fabric of Isabella's dress lay a small tattoo, an eagle with outstretched wings, the mark her mother had insisted she receive when she was 12 years old. Seeing her gesture, Elias's expression shifted. "You have it too?" It wasn't a question. Meadow nodded slowly. "My mother said it would protect me," she explained. I never understood what she meant. Elias was silent for a long moment, considering. Then he gestured to the bone necklace. "May I see that?" Hesitantly, Meadow removed the necklace and handed it to him. Elias examined it carefully, turning it over in his scarred hands, studying the pattern of the bones. "Your Apache friend was right," he said finally. "This isn't just a collection of bones. Look." He laid the necklace flat on the table. "See how they're arranged? It's a map." Meadow leaned closer, seeing the necklace with new eyes. What had appeared to be a random arrangement of small bones now revealed a pattern, a winding line, like a river, smaller bones branching off like tributaries, and at one junction, a distinctively shaped bone that could indeed represent an eagle. "Where the eagle watches over the water," she murmured, echoing her father's words. Elias nodded grimly. "Your mother knew. She gave you this to keep you safe, but also to preserve the secret until the time was right." "Or until I was old enough to understand," Meadow added, remembering her mother's final words. "It is the key to the truth." She looked up at Elias, seeing his expression harden with resolve. "What do we do now?" "We need to get you to safety," he said firmly. "Copper Creek has a sheriff. If Stone Crow's warriors are hunting you, the law should protect you." "And the gold," Elias's jaw tightened. "First priority is keeping you alive. After that, we'll see." Meadow studied him, this man who had already risked much for her, and now prepared to risk more. "Why are you helping me, truly?" For a moment, Elias's carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing a deep well of pain beneath. "Because Isabella was like you caught between worlds. Mexican mother, white father. People treated her like she was less than human." His voice roughened. "I couldn't save her. Maybe I can help you." The raw honesty of his answer touched Meadow deeply. She reached across the table and for the first time laid her hand on his. "Thank you." Elias looked down at their hands, then gently withdrew his. "We'll leave at dawn," he said, rising from the table. "Pack only what you need. It's a day's ride to Copper Creek." As he moved toward the door, Meadow called after him. "Elias, what will happen if Stone Crow finds us before we reach town?" He paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Then I'll do what needs doing." The quiet certainty in his voice was more reassuring than any bravado would have been. After he left, Meadow remained at the table, the bone necklace spread before her. She traced the pattern with her finger, following the river's course to the eagle marker. Somewhere along that river lay the gold her father had stolen, the secret her mother had died protecting, the truth that might finally set her free or condemn her forever. Dawn broke with golden light streaming across the eastern horizon as Elias and Meadow prepared to leave the ranch. The morning air held a chill that would burn away as the sun climbed higher, but for now it raised goosebumps on Meadow's arms as she secured her small bundle of belongings to the saddle. Elias worked methodically, checking the horses, adjusting cinches, packing provisions. His movements were efficient, betraying years of experience and a military precision that never quite left a man. He had said little since their conversation the previous day, but his silence wasn't unfriendly, merely focused. "Ever ridden before?" he asked, finally breaking the quiet as he led a gentle bay mare to Meadow. "Some," she admitted. "Not often. The tribe had few horses." Elias nodded, holding the mare steady as Meadow mounted. "Rosie here has a smooth gait. She'll treat you kind if you do the same for her." Meadow settled into the saddle, feeling the animal shift beneath her, adjusting to her weight. The mare's ears flicked back, listening, then forward again, calm and attentive. Meadow stroked her neck, whispering softly in Apache words of greeting and respect. Elias watched this exchange with quiet approval before mounting his own horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding. He wore his rifle in a scabbard beneath his leg and had a revolver holstered at his hip, precautions Meadow understood all too well. "We'll follow the river north," he said, gesturing toward the distant line of trees that marked the watercourse. "Stay off the main trails. Less chance of running into trouble that way." As they rode away from the cabin, Meadow glanced back, struck by a sudden pang. In just 2 weeks, the small ranch had begun to feel like a sanctuary. Now they were leaving it behind, riding toward an uncertain future. "Your home will be unprotected," she said, guilt threading through her words. Elias's expression remained impassive. "Buildings can be rebuilt. Land stays." His eyes met hers briefly. "Some things matter more." The simple statement hung in the air between them as they rode, its implications too complex to examine in the moment. Instead, Meadow focused on the rhythm of the horse beneath her, the changing landscape around them, the weight of the bone necklace against her throat. They rode in companionable silence, Elias occasionally pointing out landmarks or offering brief instructions on handling the mare. By mid-morning, they had reached the river, its water gleaming beneath the strengthening sun. They followed its winding course, keeping to the cover of the trees that lined its banks. "Is this the same river on the necklace?" Meadow asked, as they paused to water the horses. Elias nodded. "I believe so. The Snake River. It runs all through this territory." He surveyed the surrounding landscape with careful eyes. "Your father's clue about the eagle watching over water could refer to any number of places along here." Meadow studied the flowing water, trying to match it to the pattern of bones on her necklace. "My mother must have known exactly where. That's why she gave me this." "And why Stone Crow wants you dead," Elias added grimly. "If he helped steal that gold, the last thing he wants is someone knowing where it's hidden." The reminder of the danger pursuing them sobered Meadow. She touched her necklace, wondering if its secret was worth the lives at stake. They continued their journey, the sun arcing across the sky shadows, shortening, then lengthening again as afternoon approached. Elias remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, the ridge lines, the back trail. His caution was contagious, and Meadow found herself studying the landscape with new awareness, looking for signs of pursuit. When they stopped to rest in the shade of a large cottonwood, Elias shared jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. The simple meal reminded Meadow of how precarious their situation was. Two people alone in vast territory with unknown enemies potentially closing in. "Tell me about Isabella," she said suddenly, wanting to bridge the silence to know more about the man who risked so much for her. Surprise flickered across Elias's scarred face, quickly replaced by the familiar mask of control. For a moment, she thought he might refuse to answer. Then he spoke, his voice lower than usual. "She was strong, stubborn." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Had to be growing up where she did. Mexican mother, white father, neither side accepted her fully." He looked down at his hands. "We met after the war. I was broken. She put me back together." The raw honesty in those few sentences revealed more than hours of conversation might have. Meadow recognized in his grief a mirror of her own loss, the hole left by her mother's death. "And your son?" she asked gently. Pain flashed in Elias's eyes. "Thomas. He was 7 when the fever took them both." He cleared his throat. "Had his mother's eyes. My hard-headedness." "I'm sorry," Meadow said, the inadequate words all she had to offer. Elias nodded once, accepting her sympathy without allowing it to penetrate too deeply. "We should keep moving. Still a long way to Copper Creek." They mounted again, continuing their journey along the river. As the afternoon wore on, the terrain began to change, becoming more rugged, the river cutting deeper between rising banks. In places, they were forced to leave the riverside and climb to higher ground, only to descend again when the path allowed. It was during one such detour that Elias suddenly reined in his horse, raising one hand in a signal to halt. Meadow obeyed instantly, her heart rate quickening. "What is it?" she whispered. Elias's eyes were fixed on something in the distance. "Rider, coming fast." Meadow followed his gaze and saw a lone figure on horseback, moving swiftly across the open ground ahead of them. Even at this distance, she recognized the distinctive silhouette. "Raven Hawk," she said. Elias's hand moved to his rifle, but he didn't draw it. "Thought he said 2 days. Something must have changed," Meadow replied, anxiety knotting in her stomach. They waited as Raven Hawk approached his horse, lathered with sweat, evidence of a hard ride. He reined in several yards away, his expression grim. "You need to move faster," he said without preamble. "Stone Crow's warriors crossed your trail at the ranch. They're maybe half a day behind you." Elias's jaw tightened. "How many?" "6, including Stone Crow himself," Raven Hawk answered. "All armed." The news sent a chill through Meadow. 6 warriors against the 2 of them 3, if Raven Hawk stayed, were poor odds. "Why are you warning us?" Elias asked, suspicion evident in his tone. "What's your stake in this?" Raven Hawk's dark eyes flashed. "I told you, I want justice for my uncle. And—" he hesitated, glancing at Meadow. "I owe a debt." "To whom?" she pressed. "To White Dove," he said simply. "Your mother saved my life when I was a boy. I won't let her daughter die if I can prevent it." The revelation surprised Meadow. Her mother had never mentioned this connection, yet another secret kept from her until too late. "We're headed to Copper Creek," Elias said. "Sheriff there should offer some protection." Raven Hawk's expression darkened. "Sullivan, he won't help you." "Why not?" Meadow asked. "He takes money from the tribes to stay out of our affairs," Raven Hawk explained. "Stone Crow has him in his pocket." Elias cursed under his breath, a rare display of emotion. "You sure about this?" Raven Hawk nodded. "I've seen the payments made myself." And this new complication threatened their entire plan. If they couldn't count on the law for protection, where could they turn? "We still need to reach town," Elias decided after a moment. "Even if Sullivan won't help directly, it's harder to attack someone in a settlement than out here in the open." "I'll ride with you," Raven Hawk offered. "3 guns are better than 2. Elias studied him clearly, weighing the risk of trusting this Apache warrior against the advantage of another ally. Finally he nodded. "We ride hard until dusk, then make camp somewhere defensible. If they're half a day behind, that should keep it that way." They set off again, pushing the horses as much as they dared. Meadow's thighs ached from the unaccustomed riding, but she didn't complain. Pain was preferable to death at Stone Crow's hands. As they rode, she found her thoughts returning to the bone necklace and its hidden map. If they could locate the gold, would it end the danger? Or would finding it only increase the risk to their lives? The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when Elias led them off the river path and up a steep incline. At the top, a rocky outcropping provided a natural shelter with clear views in all directions. "We'll rest here for the night," he decided. "Take turns keeping watch." They made a cold camp, unwilling to risk a fire that might be spotted from a distance. As darkness fell, they ate another simple meal of jerky and dried fruit. The night air grew cool, and Meadow wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, grateful for its warmth. Raven Hawk volunteered for the first watch, positioning himself on a rock where he could observe the approaches. Elias, though clearly reluctant to sleep while the Apache was awake, eventually settled against his saddle, his rifle within easy reach. Meadow found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. The events of the past days swirled in her mind, her narrow escape from execution, the revelations about her father, and the gold, the growing connection she felt to Elias. Her life had changed irrevocably in less than a month, the future now a mystery as confounding as the map around her neck. When she finally dozed off, her dreams were troubled visions of fire and pursuit of her mother's face, of the eagle tattoo taking flight from her skin. She woke with a start to find Elias gently shaking her shoulder. "Your turn to watch," he murmured. 2 hours, then wake Raven Hawk again. Meadow nodded, shaking off the remnants of her disturbing dreams. She took Elias's place on the lookout rock, wrapping the blanket tighter against the night's chill. Below, the moonlit landscape stretched in all directions, beautiful and threatening in equal measure. As she sat in the darkness, her thoughts turned to her mother. Had White Dove known this day would come? Had she prepared Meadow for this journey without ever speaking of it directly? The bone necklace felt heavier, somehow weighted with purpose and history. The night passed without incident, each of them taking their turn at watch. When dawn broke, they were already preparing to continue their journey, eating quickly and saddling the horses with efficient movements. "How far to Copper Creek?" Meadow asked as they mounted. "If we push hard, we can be there by mid-afternoon," Elias answered, checking his rifle before sliding it into its scabbard. Ravenhawk, who had been scanning their back trail, suddenly stiffened. "Riders, coming fast." Elias and Meadow turned to look. In the distance, dust rose from the hooves of multiple horses, the morning sun glinting occasionally off metal weapons or ornaments. It was impossible to tell at this range. "Stone Crow," Ravenhawk confirmed grimly. "They've gained ground overnight." "How many?" Elias demanded. "Can't tell yet. At least 4. Decision hardened in Elias's eyes. "We ride now. Stay close to me." They spurred their horses down the eastern slope of the outcropping, away from the approaching riders. Meadow's mare responded gamely to her urgency, matching pace with Elias's buckskin. Ravenhawk took the rear position, occasionally glancing back to gauge the pursuers' progress. The chase continued through the morning, a grim race across increasingly broken terrain. They forded streams, skirted ravines, pushed through brush that tore at clothing and skin alike. The horses began to tire their flanks, lathered with sweat. But the distant dust cloud of their pursuers remained a constant threat. "They're gaining," Ravenhawk called as they crested a rise. "We need to find better ground or make a stand." Elias scanned the landscape ahead, his experienced eye seeking advantage. "There," he pointed to a distant smudge on the horizon. "That's Riley's station, old stage stop. Been abandoned since the new line went through, but the buildings are still standing. Better than facing them in the open." They angled toward the station, pushing their weary horses to a final effort. As they drew closer, the outlines of several structures became visible: a main building, a stable, a corral with broken fencing. The place had the forlorn look of human endeavor, abandoned to the elements. They reached the station shortly after noon, the horses nearly spent. The main building was a low adobe structure with a flat roof, its windows empty of glass, but the walls still solid. The stable offered additional cover, and between the two buildings lay an open yard that would force attackers to cross exposed ground. "Get the horses inside the stable," Elias ordered as they dismounted. "Then take positions in the main building. High windows, thick walls, it's as good as we're going to get." They worked quickly, unsaddling the exhausted horses and giving them water from a half-barrel that still caught rainwater. Then they gathered what weapons they had: Elias's rifle and revolver, Ravenhawk's bow and knife, and a small knife Meadow had kept hidden in her boot, and moved to the main building. Inside, dust covered everything. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and a faded curtain still hung at one window, tattered by time and weather. Elias positioned them carefully himself at the front window facing the approach, Ravenhawk at the side window overlooking the yard, and Meadow at the rear, watching for any attempt to circle around. "If shooting starts," Elias instructed Meadow, "stay low and away from the windows. These adobe walls will stop most bullets, but the openings are vulnerable." She nodded, grateful for his calm authority, even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. This was her fault. These men were risking their lives because of her, because of a secret she hadn't even known she carried. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "This is because of me." Elias glanced at her, his expression softening momentarily. "You didn't choose this fight. Your father did 20 years ago. And Stone Crow." "He speaks truth," Ravenhawk added from his position. "The past casts long shadows. We all walk in them." The philosophical observation was interrupted by Elias's sharp intake of breath. "They're here." Meadow peered carefully around her window frame. 5 riders approached from the west, spread out in a loose formation. At their center rode Stone Crow, unmistakable even at a distance, with his gray-streaked hair and the eagle feather he always wore. Beside him was Coy, a young warrior known for his cruelty, and 3 others she recognized from the tribe. 5, she reported. Ravenhawk said 6 earlier. "One might be circling around," Elias warned. "Keep sharp." The riders halted just beyond easy rifle range. Stone Crow raised his hand, and one of the warriors lifted a white cloth tied to a lance, a signal for parley. "They want to talk," Ravenhawk observed. Elias's mouth set in a grim line. "Or they want us to show ourselves so they can get a clean shot." "Stone Crow will honor a parley flag," Ravenhawk said with certainty. "He is many things, but he holds to the old ways in this." After a moment's consideration, Elias nodded. "I'll go out. You 2 stay covered." "No," Meadow protested. "It's me they want." "Which is why you're staying inside," Elias countered firmly. Before she could argue further, he moved to the door, keeping his rifle ready, but pointed downward, a show of willingness to talk, while maintaining readiness for trouble. He stepped into the yard, positioning himself where the adobe wall still provided some cover. Stone Crow and his warriors remained mounted, looking down at Elias with expressions ranging from contempt to curiosity. "State your business," Elias called, his voice carrying across the open ground. Stone Crow studied him for a long moment before responding. "We seek the woman Meadow Eagle. She has fled judgment and stolen something that belongs to the tribe." "What has she stolen?" Elias asked, though he already knew the answer. "A sacred object," Stone Crow replied smoothly, "and knowledge that is not hers to possess." From her window, Meadow could see the exchange clearly. Stone Crow sat his horse with the dignity of his position, but there was something in his eyes, a hunger, a desperation, that belied his calm words. "The woman is under my protection," Elias stated. "Whatever grievance you have can be settled peacefully in town with witnesses." A harsh laugh came from Coy. "The white man speaks of peace while holding a rifle." Stone Crow silenced him with a gesture. "This is not a matter for white man's law. It is between Meadow Eagle and her people. Her people were going to burn her alive." Elias replied, anger finally coloring his tone. "That's not justice. That's murder." A tense silence followed this accusation. Then Stone Crow leaned forward slightly in his saddle. "You do not understand our ways. The woman carries a curse. She carries the truth," Ravenhawk's voice interrupted as he stepped out from the doorway to stand beside Elias. "And that is what you fear, Uncle." Stone Crow's expression hardened at the sight of his nephew. "You betray your blood by standing with them." "I honor my blood," Ravenhawk countered. "My father's blood spilled by treachery 20 years ago." The accusation hung in the air, its impact visible in the shifting expressions of the other warriors. They glanced at each other, then at Stone Crow, uncertainty replacing their earlier resolve. Stone Crow's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened where they gripped his reins. "You speak of things you do not understand, nephew." "I understand that William Fletcher did not act alone when he stole the tribe's gold," Ravenhawk said clearly. "He had help from within, from you." One of the warriors muttered something in Apache, his expression troubled. Stone Crow barked a command for silence, but the damage was done. Seeds of doubt had been planted. "Give us the woman," Stone Crow demanded, his composure cracking slightly, "and the necklace she wears. Then you may go free." Elias shook his head. "Not going to happen." Stone Crow's eyes narrowed. "Then you will die with her." He raised his hand, a signal to his warriors. Before he could complete the gesture, Meadow stepped out of the doorway. "Stop," she called. "I am here. If it's me you want, let them go." "Meadow, get back inside," Elias ordered, not taking his eyes off the mounted warriors. She ignored him, moving forward until she stood between Elias and Ravenhawk. The bone necklace hung visible at her throat, its pattern catching the sunlight. "You want this," she said, touching the necklace, "because you know what it truly is." Stone Crow's expression flickered with naked greed. "It is tribal property. Sacred." "It's a map," Meadow countered. "To the gold you helped steal. The gold that cost Ravenhawk's father his life." Stone Crow's face darkened with rage. "You know nothing." "I know my mother gave me this to keep safe," Meadow replied. "I know she marked me with the eagle tattoo as my father was marked. I know she wanted the truth to be known one day." The revelation about the tattoo caused a visible reaction among Stone Crow's warriors. They exchanged glances laden with meaning. The eagle tattoo was evidently significant in ways Meadow herself didn't fully understand. Stone Crow saw their reaction and realized his control was slipping. With a sudden movement, he drew his rifle from its scabbard. "Enough talk!" Everything happened at once. Elias shoved Meadow back toward the doorway as he raised his own rifle. Ravenhawk dove sideways, rolling to cover behind a water trough. The warriors behind Stone Crow spread out, weapons appearing in their hands. The first shot came from Stone Crow, the bullet striking the adobe wall, inches from Elias's head, sending fragments of dried mud flying. Elias returned fire, his shot more careful, striking Stone Crow's horse. The animal reared in pain, throwing its rider before bolting away. Chaos erupted. Bullets whined through the air, thudding into the adobe walls or whizzing through empty window frames. Elias and Meadow retreated into the building, while Ravenhawk remained in his position behind the trough, using his bow to deadly effect when opportunities presented themselves. "Stay down," Elias ordered as he took up position at a window, firing measured shots at the attackers who had dismounted and sought cover of their own. Meadow pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The confined space amplified each gunshot to a deafening roar. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, acrid and choking. Through a crack in the wall, she could see Stone Crow crawling toward a cluster of rocks, his rifle still clutched in one hand. Blood stained his leggings where he had been injured in the fall, but his face showed only rage and determination. The gunfight continued for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. Ammunition was limited on both sides, making each shot precious. Two of Stone Crow's warriors had been hit. One lay motionless in the dirt. The other had dragged himself behind their horses for cover. A lull fell over the battlefield, both sides conserving ammunition, waiting for the other to make a mistake. In that strange quiet, Meadow became aware of another sound, hoofbeats approaching from the east. "Someone's coming," she warned Elias. He nodded, having heard it too. Could be the sixth warrior circling back. But as the rider came into view, it became clear this was no Apache warrior. It was a white man wearing a dusty brown coat and a star-shaped badge that caught the sunlight. "Sullivan," Elias muttered, recognizing the sheriff of Copper Creek. The lawman rode directly into the contested ground between the station and Stone Crow's position, seemingly unconcerned about the bullets that had been flying moments before. He reined in his horse and surveyed the scene with cold eyes beneath the brim of his hat. "What in hell's name is going on here?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the yard. Stone Crow emerged partially from his cover, keeping his rifle ready. "Sheriff, this is not your concern. These people harbor a fugitive from tribal justice." Sullivan's gaze moved to the station where Elias now stood in the doorway, rifle lowered but still in hand. "Blackwood," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Been a while." "Sullivan," Elias returned neutrally. "Didn't expect to see you out this far from town." The sheriff dismounted, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Word reached me that there might be trouble. Seems I was right." He glanced at the fallen warrior. "Someone's already dead. That makes it my business." Meadow joined Elias at the doorway, curiosity overcoming caution. Sullivan was a tall man with weathered features and eyes that revealed nothing of his thoughts. There was something familiar about him, though she was certain they had never met. Sullivan's gaze settled on her recognition flickering across his face before his expression resumed its impassivity. "This, the woman?" he asked Elias. "Meadow Eagle," Elias confirmed. "She's done nothing wrong. Stone Crow wants her dead because she knows something that could expose him." Sullivan's eyebrow raised slightly. "That right." Before Elias could elaborate, Stone Crow called out, "She is Apache. This is a tribal matter. Your own agreement says you will not interfere in our affairs." The sheriff turned back to Stone Crow. "My agreement says I don't poke into how you govern yourselves on your own land. This," he gestured to the station, "ain't your land. And a firefight that kills people is my jurisdiction, no matter who's involved." Stone Crow's face darkened with anger. "We had an understanding, Sullivan." Something cold and dangerous entered the sheriff's eyes. "Careful, Chief. Sounds like you're suggesting I'm not doing my job proper." The implied threat hung in the air. For all his supposed neutrality, Sullivan clearly held the power in this exchange. Stone Crow, injured and with his warriors depleted, was in no position to challenge him. "What do you propose?" Stone Crow asked, finally his tone carefully modulated. Sullivan considered for a moment. "Everyone puts down their weapons. You tell me what this is really about. Then we decide what happens next, according to the law." "And if we refuse?" Stone Crow pressed. The sheriff's hand moved casually to rest on his holstered revolver. "Then I arrest the lot of you for murder and attempted murder. Got a nice sturdy jail in Copper Creek with plenty of room." It was a standoff, but one Sullivan clearly controlled. After a tense moment, Stone Crow lowered his rifle. "Very well, we will talk." Sullivan nodded, then turned to Elias. "Blackwood." Elias hesitated clearly, reluctant to relinquish his advantage. Finally, he lowered his rifle but didn't set it aside completely. "Ravenhawk," he called, "come on out. Sheriff wants to talk." The Apache warrior emerged cautiously from his position, bow held loosely at his side. His face was streaked with dust and sweat, but he appeared uninjured. "Now," Sullivan said, looking between the two groups, "someone tell me what's worth dying for out here." Meadow stepped forward, touching the bone necklace at her throat. "This, and what it leads to." Sullivan's eyes narrowed as he studied the necklace. And that would be gold, Elias answered. Stolen from the Apache 20 years ago by a white trader named William Fletcher and his accomplice. He nodded toward Stone Crow. The sheriff's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes at the mention of Fletcher's name. "That's quite an accusation," he said. "Any proof?" "The necklace is a map," Meadow explained. "My mother gave it to me before she died. She knew where the gold was hidden." Stone Crow spat on the ground. "It is. The woman seeks to divide our tribe with her false claims." "Then why try to kill her?" Elias challenged. "Why chase her across territory? Why not just let her go if she's no threat?" Sullivan raised a hand to silence them. "Gold has a way of making people forget themselves." He turned to Meadow. "You saying you know where this treasure is?" She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Sullivan's neutrality made his allegiances unclear. Would he help them, or was he as corrupt as Raven Hawk had suggested? "I believe I could find it," she said carefully. "With help." Sullivan studied her for a long moment, then glanced at Stone Crow. "And you claim this woman is under tribal judgment. For what crime?" Stone Crow straightened, drawing on his dignity as a leader. "She brings bad fortune. Her unnatural form is a sign of the spirit's displeasure. For the good of the tribe, she must be cleansed by fire." The sheriff's expression hardened. "You mean burned alive?" "It is our way," Stone Crow insisted. "Not in my jurisdiction," Sullivan said flatly. "Murder is murder, no matter what you call it." He turned back to Meadow. "The necklace. May I see it?" After a moment's hesitation, Meadow removed the bone necklace and handed it to the sheriff. Sullivan examined it carefully, turning it over in his hands, tracing the pattern with his finger. "Interesting craftsmanship," he remarked. "Don't look like a random collection of bones to me." He glanced up at Stone Crow. "Looks deliberate, meaningful." Stone Crow's face remained impassive, but his eyes tracked the necklace in Sullivan's hands with barely concealed hunger. "If this leads to stolen gold," Sullivan continued, "that makes it evidence in a crime. By rights, I should take it into custody." "No!" Stone Crow and Meadow exclaimed simultaneously. Sullivan's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "Thought that might get a reaction." He handed the necklace back to Meadow. "Here's what's going to happen. We're all riding back to Copper Creek. Together, no more shooting. Once we're there, we'll sort this out proper." "And the gold?" Stone Crow demanded. "If it exists, and if it was stolen, it goes back to its rightful owners," Sullivan stated, "after the facts are established. That's how the law works." Stone Crow's face darkened with anger, but he nodded stiffly. His position was too weak to argue. "Gather your wounded," Sullivan instructed him. "We'll bury the dead here. No sense carrying a body all that way." As Stone Crow and his remaining warriors tended to their injured companion, Sullivan moved closer to Elias, speaking in a low voice that Meadow could just barely hear. "You always did have a talent for finding trouble, Blackwood." Elias's expression remained guarded. "Been a long time, Sullivan." "Not long enough, some might say." The sheriff glanced at Meadow. "She worth dying for?" "She deserves justice," Elias replied simply. Sullivan studied him for a moment. "Still trying to save the world, one person at a time." It wasn't quite mockery, but something close. Some things never change. Meadow sensed history between these men, old wounds that had never properly healed. There was tension in Elias's posture that hadn't been there before, a wariness that went beyond the current situation. "You still taking payments to look the other way?" Elias asked, his voice pitched so only Sullivan could hear. The sheriff's expression hardened. "Careful, Blackwood. I'm the only thing standing between you and a bullet right now. Just wondering if you're actually enforcing the law these days or still bending it when it suits you." Sullivan's hand twitched near his holster. "You want to hash out old grievances. We can do that after we get these people to town without more bloodshed." Their conversation was interrupted by Ravenhawk, who approached with quiet steps. "The injured warrior can ride," he reported. "They're nearly ready." Sullivan nodded. "Good. Let's get moving. Daylight's burning, and I don't fancy camping with this bunch." As they prepared to leave, Meadow found a moment to speak privately with Elias. "What's between you and the sheriff?" she asked softly. Elias's jaw tightened. "History. We served together in the war. Afterward, he took the star, I took to ranching. Our paths crossed again about 10 years back, when I caught him taking bribes to ignore cattle rustling. You reported him. Tried to. Nobody believed me over the town sheriff." Elias checked his saddle cinch with more force than necessary. "He's held a grudge ever since." "Can we trust him?" Meadow asked, glancing toward where Sullivan was mounting his horse. "To follow the law, maybe. To do what's right." Elias shook his head. "That I doubt." The grim assessment did little to reassure Meadow as they prepared to ride. The fragile truce brokered by Sullivan felt like walking on ice, one wrong step, and they would all plunge into deadly waters. They buried the fallen warrior in a shallow grave marked by stones. A brief ceremony conducted by Stone Crow with words in Apache that Meadow understood, but the white men did not. Prayers for safe passage to the spirit world, even for one who had died in an unjust cause. Then they mounted up Meadow Elias and Ravenhawk on one side, Stone Crow and his 3 remaining warriors on the other, Sheriff Sullivan in the middle, a human barrier between potential violence. The injured warrior rode double with one of his companions, his face tight with pain, but making no sound of complaint. They set off toward Copper Creek, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon. The journey would take several hours, meaning they would arrive after dark, a fact that clearly made Elias uneasy. "Keep alert," he murmured to Meadow as they rode. "This isn't over yet." She nodded, understanding his concern. Stone Crow had been forced into this truce, not willingly accepted it. Given an opportunity, he would still seek to eliminate her and secure the necklace for himself. As they rode, Meadow found herself studying Sullivan. The sheriff maintained his position between the two groups, occasionally exchanging words with Stone Crow, or Elias keeping the peace with his presence alone. There was an air of authority about him that commanded respect, yet something in his eyes, a calculation, a coldness, made her wary. Ravenhawk rode close to Meadow, his expression grave. "The sheriff cannot be trusted," he said quietly when Sullivan was engaged in conversation with Stone Crow. "He serves whoever pays him best." "Elias said something similar," Meadow replied. "But what choice do we have?" Ravenhawk's gaze moved to the horizon. "Always there is choice. Sometimes none of them are good." The philosophical observation hung between them as they continued their journey, the landscape gradually changing as they approached more settled lands. Fields began to appear, then fences, then the occasional distant farmhouse. Civilization with all its protections and constraints drew nearer. As twilight deepened into dusk, lights appeared ahead the small settlement of Copper Creek. From a distance, it looked peaceful, welcoming even. A cluster of buildings around a main street, lanterns, glowing in windows, the spire of a small church, rising above the other structures. "Almost there," Sullivan called back to the group. "Everyone stay calm when we ride in. Don't need to panic the townsfolk." They entered Copper Creek as full darkness settled their unusual procession, drawing curious glances from the few people still on the streets. Sullivan led them directly to the jailhouse, a solid brick building with barred windows and a hitching rail out front. "Dismount here," he ordered. "Blackwood, you and the woman and the Apache come inside. Stone Crow, you wait out here with your men." Stone Crow's eyes narrowed. "Why should we wait outside? The matter concerns us equally." "Because my office ain't big enough for everyone," Sullivan replied bluntly. "And because I say so." The challenge to his authority hung in the air for a moment before Stone Crow inclined his head in reluctant acceptance. Sullivan dismounted and tied his horse, then unlocked the jailhouse door and gestured for Elias Meadow and Ravenhawk to enter. Inside the jailhouse was sparsely furnished a desk and chair for the sheriff, a gun rack on the wall, a small iron stove for heat, and 3 cells along the back wall, their barred doors standing open. Sullivan lit a lamp, then moved behind his desk, the familiar territory seeming to increase his air of authority. "Now," he said, fixing his gaze on Meadow, "tell me everything. Start with who you are and why Stone Crow wants you dead." Meadow hesitated, looking to Elias for guidance. He nodded slightly, encouraging her to speak. "My name is Meadow Eagle," she began. "My mother was White Dove of the Chiricahua Apache. My father was a white trader named William Fletcher, though I never knew him." Sullivan's expression revealed nothing as she continued explaining her mixed heritage, her status in the tribe, Stone Crow's accusations of her being cursed, and finally the ceremony that had condemned her to death by fire. "So you escaped," Sullivan summarized when she paused, "and somehow ended up with Blackwood here." "I found her collapsed by the river," Elias explained. "Near death from exhaustion and exposure. I took her to my ranch to recover." Sullivan's gaze moved to Ravenhawk. "And you, where do you fit in this story?" The Apache warrior stood straight, his dignity evident despite his youth. "I am the son of Stone Crow's brother who was killed 20 years ago when the gold was stolen. I seek justice for my father. By helping the very people Stone Crow is hunting." Sullivan's skepticism was evident. "By finding the truth," Ravenhawk corrected. "Stone Crow does not want justice. He wants to hide his own guilt." Sullivan leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming on the desk surface. "So this all comes down to gold stolen 2 decades ago, a bone necklace that's supposedly a map, and a tribal elder who may or may not have been involved in theft and murder." He shook his head. "Sounds like the kind of story men tell when they've had too much whiskey." "It's the truth," Meadow insisted, touching the necklace at her throat. "My mother gave me this before she died. She said it was the key to the truth. She also had me tattooed with the same mark my father wore, an eagle with outstretched wings." Interest flickered in Sullivan's eyes. "Show me." After a moment's hesitation, Meadow turned and lowered the shoulder of her dress just enough to reveal the small tattoo on her upper back. Sullivan rose from his desk and approached, studying the mark with unexpected intensity. "I've seen that before," he said quietly. "Not just on Fletcher." "Where else?" Elias asked sharply. Sullivan's expression closed again. "That's not important right now." He returned to his desk. "What matters is figuring out what to do with all of you." "The law is clear," Elias argued. "Stone Crow attempted murder. He and his warriors should be locked up." "And who would testify against them?" Sullivan countered. "You, the woman he was hunting, his own nephew, who turned against him, not exactly unbiased witnesses. There's a dead man back at Riley's station who can't testify at all, thanks to Stone Crow," Elias pointed out. Sullivan sighed, rubbing his forehead as though pained. "It's not that simple, Blackwood. You know that. The tribes have their own laws, their own justice. If I start arresting tribal elders, we could have a war on our hands." So you will let him go. Let him try again to kill Meadow. Elias's voice rose with anger. I didn't say that. Sullivan's tone sharpened. I'm trying to find a solution that doesn't end with more people dead. Ravenhawk, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke. There is one way to resolve this. Find the gold. Return it to the tribe. Let the truth be known about how it was stolen and who was involved. Sullivan considered this. And you think that would satisfy Stone Crow, make him forget his vendetta against Meadow here? No, Ravenhawk admitted. But it would satisfy the tribe, and without the tribe's support, Stone Crow is just one man. The sheriff's gaze moved to the bone necklace. So it all comes back to that. The map. He leaned forward. If you can find this gold, where would it lead us? Meadow touched the necklace thoughtfully. Somewhere along the Snake River, where the eagle watches over the water. That's what my father told Elias before he died. The Eagle Rocks, Sullivan said suddenly. They're about a day's ride north of here. Limestone formation that looks like an eagle with spread wings overlooking a bend in the river. Elias and Meadow exchanged surprised glances. The description matched both the clue and the pattern in the bone necklace. You know the place? Elias asked. Sullivan nodded. Used to fish there as a boy. Haven't been in years, but I'd know the way. A plan began to form in Meadow's mind. If we found the gold and returned it to the tribe, it would expose Stone Crow's involvement in its theft. He would lose his position, his authority. And if we don't find it, Sullivan countered, or if there's nothing to find, then at least I tried, Meadow said simply. I owe that to my mother, to the truth she wanted preserved. Sullivan studied her for a long moment, then glanced at Elias and Ravenhawk. Something shifted in his expression, a decision being made. All right, he said finally. Here's what we'll do. At dawn, we ride for Eagle Rocks. All of us, you three, me, Stone Crow, and his warriors. We find this gold, if it exists, and sort out once and for all who's entitled to what. He fixed Elias with a hard stare. And no more shooting unless I say so. Clear. Elias nodded reluctantly. Clear. What about tonight? Meadow asked, glancing toward the window where Stone Crow and his warriors waited outside. Sullivan rose from his desk. Tonight you three stay here in the cells, for your own protection. I'll put Stone Crow and his men in the boarding house across the street, where I can keep an eye on them. You're locking us up? Elias asked incredulously. It's that, or leave you all loose in town to potentially kill each other before morning, Sullivan replied. This way, everyone stays alive, until we can sort this mess out properly. It wasn't ideal, but Meadow could see the logic in the sheriff's decision. The cells, while confining, would at least be secure against any attempt by Stone Crow to finish what he had started. Fine, Elias conceded grudgingly, but I want my rifle back in the morning. Sullivan nodded. You'll get it, when we're ready to leave. He moved to the door. Make yourselves comfortable. I'll arrange things with Stone Crow, then bring you some food. After he left, closing the door firmly behind him, Elias turned to Meadow and Ravenhawk. I don't trust him, he said bluntly. Nor do I, Ravenhawk agreed. But for now, his plan serves our purpose. Meadow touched the bone necklace, feeling its weight against her skin. Tomorrow, we find the truth, whatever it may be. As night settled fully over Copper Creek, they arranged themselves in the cells, one each, doors closed, but unlocked, as Sullivan had promised. The jailhouse was quiet. The only sounds the occasional voices from the street outside and the ticking of a clock on the sheriff's desk. Meadow lay on the narrow cot in her cell, staring at the ceiling. thoughts whirling. Tomorrow, they would follow the map her mother had entrusted to her, seeking gold stolen before she was born. Tomorrow, they might find answers to questions she hadn't even known to ask until recently. And tomorrow, one way or another, her life would change again for better or worse, remained to be seen. Dawn broke over Copper Creek with fingers of gold and rose stretching across the eastern sky. Meadow woke to the sounds of the town coming alive. Horses being led to water shopkeepers opening their doors, the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer. She sat up on the narrow cot, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, before remembering the jailhouse, the cell's Sullivan's plan. In the adjacent cells, Elias and Ravenhawk were already awake. Elias stood at his barred window watching the street with wary eyes. Ravenhawk sat cross-legged on his cot, his expression serene despite their confinement, as though engaged in some form of private meditation. The jailhouse door opened and Sheriff Sullivan entered, carrying a tray with coffee and plates of food. He looked as though he had slept little, his face shadowed with stubble, his eyes alert but tired. "Morning," he greeted them gruffly, setting the tray on his desk. "Thought you might want something before we head out." Elias turned from the window. "Stone Crow and his men." "Fed and ready," Sullivan replied. "They're saddling the horses now." He unlocked each cell door, swinging them open. "Come eat. We've got a long day ahead." They gathered around the sheriff's desk, accepting the simple breakfast of beans, bacon, and biscuits. Meadow ate slowly, her stomach tight with anticipation and nerves. Today they would follow her mother's map to whatever secret it revealed, the culmination of a journey she had never intended to make. "How far to Eagle Rocks?" Elias asked as he drank his coffee. "About 6 hours' ride if we push," Sullivan answered. "Rough country, but passable." He glanced at Meadow. "That necklace of yours, you think it really shows the way?" Meadow touched the bone necklace at her throat. "I believe so. The pattern matches what you described, a river, with a distinctive bend and a formation like an eagle." Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. "Well, we'll know soon enough." He rose, gathering his hat and gun belt from a hook on the wall. "Finish up. I want to be on the trail within the hour." Outside, the morning air was crisp, carrying the scents of pine and wood smoke. The town of Copper Creek was small, but thriving, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church at one end, the general store and saloon at the center, and scattered homes radiating outward like ripples from a stone dropped in water. People stopped to stare as their unusual party assembled in front of the jailhouse, Sheriff Sullivan stern and official. Elias, watchful and guarded. Meadow, the object of curious whispers due to her mixed heritage. Ravenhawk, his Apache dignity drawing both fear and fascination. And Stone Crow, with his 3 warriors foreign and intimidating to the townspeople. Sullivan had arranged for fresh horses, and their gear had been transferred from their previous mounts. Elias checked his rifle carefully before sliding it into the saddle scabbard, his movements precise and methodical. Meadow noticed that the sheriff positioned their group deliberately himself at the front. Then Meadow, Elias, and Ravenhawk, with Stone Crow and his warriors bringing up the rear. It was an arrangement designed to minimize conflict, keeping the most hostile parties separated. "Everyone clear on the plan?" Sullivan asked, looking around the group. "We ride to Eagle Rocks. We search for the gold. Whatever we find belongs to whoever can prove rightful ownership." His gaze lingered on Stone Crow. "And there will be no violence unless I authorize it." "Understood." Stone Crow inclined his head slightly, his face impassive. "We understand your terms, Sheriff." Sullivan studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "Mount up." They rode out of Copper Creek in single file, following Sullivan along a trail that led northward through rolling hills. The morning sun warmed their backs as they traveled, casting long shadows ahead of them. Meadow rode just behind the sheriff, acutely aware of the tension humming through their party like a plucked bowstring. As the town receded behind them, the landscape opened up broad valleys flanked by rugged hills, patches of pine forest alternating with open meadows. It was beautiful country wild, and largely untouched, the kind of land that seemed to hold secrets in its very soil. Sullivan set a steady pace, not pushing the horses too hard, but making good time nonetheless. Occasionally he would point out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, an abandoned homestead, a creek crossing marking their progress toward their destination. Meadow found herself studying the sheriff as they rode. There was something about him that remained elusive, a depth beneath his gruff exterior that she couldn't quite fathom. He knew more than he was saying about the eagle tattoo about her father, perhaps even about the gold itself. Yet he kept his own counsel, revealing only what served his immediate purpose. Around midday, they paused to rest the horses beside a small stream. As the animals drank, the members of their party maintained their separate groupings, Sullivan standing apart, observing. Meadow Elias and Raven Hawk clustered near their horses. Stone Crow and his warriors speaking quietly in Apache several yards away. Elias approached Meadow as she refilled her canteen in the stream. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I'm fine," she assured him, though in truth the weight of expectation pressed heavily on her shoulders. "Just anxious to reach our destination." Elias nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "Whatever we find or don't find, it doesn't change anything about who you are." The simple statement touched Meadow deeply. Throughout her life, she had been defined by others. Her mixed blood, her appearance, her status as an outsider within her own tribe. Elias was the first person besides her mother who had seen her simply as herself, not as a collection of attributes to be judged. "Thank you," she said softly. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, then he glanced away, suddenly self-conscious. "We should get ready to move on. Still a long way to go." As they remounted and continued their journey, the terrain became more challenging. The trail narrowed, winding through rocky passes and dense stands of pine. Sullivan led them confidently, though occasionally he would pause, studying the landscape as if confirming his bearings. "Not much further," he called back after one such pause. "Another hour, maybe two." The announcement sent a ripple of tension through the group. They were nearing the culmination of their journey, the moment when the bone necklace's secret would finally be revealed or proven meaningless. As they rode, Ravenhawk drew his horse alongside Meadows. "Are you prepared for what we might find?" he asked quietly. She considered the question. "I'm not sure anyone can be prepared for something they've never imagined seeking." "The gold itself is not what matters," Ravenhawk observed. "It is the truth it represents. For 20 years, lies have shaped your life and mine. Today, perhaps we find freedom from them." Meadow nodded, appreciating his perspective. For Ravenhawk, this journey was about justice for his father. For her, it was about understanding her own history, her mother's secrets, her place in a world that had never fully accepted her. The sun had passed its zenith and begun its westward descent when Sullivan reined in his horse at the crest of a hill. "There," he said, pointing ahead, "Eagle Rocks." Meadow followed his gesture and caught her breath. Before them lay a wide valley cut by the sinuous path of the Snake River. On the far side, rising from the riverbank, stood a massive limestone formation that indeed resembled an eagle with outstretched wings. The resemblance was uncanny, the curved beak, the broad sweep of wings, even a suggestion of talons at the base. Nature had sculpted what human hands could only imitate. "It matches," she whispered, touching the bone necklace. The pattern of bones depicted exactly this view: the river's bend, the distinctive rock formation, even smaller features of the landscape represented by smaller bones in the arrangement. They descended into the valley, the Eagle Rocks growing larger and more imposing as they approached. By the time they reached the riverbank, the formation loomed above them, casting long shadows across the water. Sullivan dismounted, tying his horse to a tree. "The gold, if it exists, would be hidden somewhere around here. In a cave, maybe, or buried." The others dismounted as well, their eyes scanning the area, searching for any sign, any clue. Meadow removed the bone necklace, laying it flat on a rock, where everyone could see it. The pattern was unmistakable, now that they stood before the actual landscape, a miniature map of exactly where they now found themselves. "Look here," she said, pointing to a small bone shaped differently from the others positioned at the base of the Eagle formation. This could indicate a specific location. Stone Crow pushed forward, his interest overcoming his hostility. "Yes," he agreed, studying the necklace. "That bone is from a hawk's foot. It would not be used without meaning." They all stared at the massive rock formation, then at the specific area indicated by the hawk bone, a shadowed section at the base of the eagle's right wing. "Let's check it out," Sullivan decided, leading the way. As they approached the base of Eagle Rocks, the terrain became steeper and more broken. Loose stones shifted beneath their boots, and thorny brush tore at their clothing. The late afternoon sun cast deep shadows among the rocks, creating pockets of darkness where anything might be hidden. The spot indicated by the hawk bone turned out to be a narrow fissure in the limestone, barely visible until they stood directly before it. It was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways, and darkness yawned beyond. "Could be a cave system," Sullivan observed, peering into the opening. "Or a dead end," Elias added, ever practical. Ravenhawk had been examining the rocks around the fissure. "Look here," he said, pointing to a small weathered carving barely visible in the limestone. It depicted an eagle, the same design as the tattoo Meadow bore on her shoulder. "He marked it," she breathed, running her fingers over the carving. "My father marked the place." Sullivan produced a lantern from his saddlebag, lighting it with quick, practiced movements. "I'll go first," he announced. "Then Meadow, since it's her map that brought us here. The rest of you follow one at a time." He squeezed through the fissure, the lantern's glow disappearing as he entered. Meadow hesitated only briefly before following, turning sideways to slip through the narrow opening. The rock scraped against her back and chest, cool and unyielding, but she pushed forward until suddenly the space opened up and she found herself in a cave. Sullivan stood a few feet away, his lantern illuminating a chamber perhaps 20 feet across. The ceiling rose to about twice a man's height, and the walls were smooth limestone, showing signs of having been shaped by water long ago. "Careful where you step," he warned as the others began to enter behind her. "Ground's uneven." Soon they had all squeezed through the fissure and stood in the cave. Sullivan, Meadow, Elias Ravenhawk, Stone Crow, and his 3 warriors. The air was cool and damp, smelling of earth and minerals. Their breathing echoed slightly off the stone walls. "Now what?" Elias asked, his voice hushed despite himself. Meadow closed her eyes, trying to remember her mother's words, any clue White Dove might have given her about this place. "The eagle watches over the water," she murmured, recalling her father's dying words to Elias. She opened her eyes and looked up. There, carved into the ceiling of the cave, was another eagle symbol, this one larger and more detailed than the one outside. It was positioned directly above a depression in the cave floor, a natural basin that might once have held water. "There," she said, pointing. Look at the ceiling. Sullivan raised his lantern, illuminating the carving. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. Your father wasn't just spinning Tails Blackwood. Elias stepped forward, examining the depression in the floor. It's dry now, but this looks like it was deliberately shaped. He knelt, running his hands along the edge of the basin. There's something here. He brushed away years of accumulated dust and debris, revealing a stone slab fitted into the floor. It was perhaps 3 feet square, and had no obvious handle or means of lifting it. A trapdoor, Sullivan suggested, kneeling beside Elias. Maybe. Elias pressed experimentally at different points around the edge. But how to open it? Meadow joined them, studying the slab. In the center, barely visible beneath the grime, was another eagle carving smaller than the others, but unmistakable. The eagle again, she said, tracing it with her finger. As she did, she felt something give slightly beneath her touch. Wait, I think... She pressed harder on the carving, and there was a distinct click. The stone slab shifted, dropping slightly on one side. It's a lever mechanism, Elias realized, grabbing the raised edge and pulling. The slab moved reluctantly, scraping against stone as he dragged it aside to reveal a dark hole beneath. Sullivan held his lantern over the opening. The light revealed a small chamber below, perhaps 4 feet deep, and within it, the dull gleam of metal. The gold... Stone Crow breathed, his voice thick with emotion. And indeed, it was. As Sullivan lowered the lantern into the hole, they could all see several leather pouches, their contents spilling out, gold coins, nuggets, and small ingots, the treasure stolen from the Apache tribe 20 years earlier. After all this time, Ravenhawk said softly, my father died protecting this. Stone Crow's expression was unreadable, a complex mixture of greed, vindication, and something like fear. His warriors murmured among themselves in Apache, their eyes fixed on the gold. Let's get it out. Sullivan decided, reaching down into the hole to lift one of the pouches. Count it. Make sure it's all there. All there, Elias questioned. How would you know how much there should be? Sullivan froze momentarily, then continued lifting the pouch as if the question hadn't struck a nerve. Figure of speech, Blackwood. I meant, let's make sure we've found everything that's hidden. But the slip hadn't gone unnoticed. Meadow exchanged glances with Elias, seeing her own suspicion reflected in his eyes. How indeed would Sullivan know the amount of gold that had been stolen? They worked together to retrieve the pouches from the hidden chamber, arranging them on the cave floor. There were 6 in total, each about the size of a man's head, heavy with their precious contents. The lantern light gleamed off the gold, casting warm reflections on the cave walls. As the last pouch was lifted out, Meadow noticed something else in the chamber. A small bundle wrapped in deerskin tucked into a corner. She reached down and retrieved it, feeling its negligible weight compared to the gold. What's that? Sullivan asked sharply. Meadow unwrapped the bundle carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, but still intact, protected by the deerskin covering. She opened it to reveal a letter written in faded ink. It's from my father, she said, recognizing the signature at the bottom, William Fletcher. Read it, Elias encouraged gently. Meadow's hands trembled slightly as she held the letter to the light. The words of a father she had never known, preserved all these years, waiting for her. To whoever finds this, she began reading aloud. My name is William Fletcher. If you are reading this, then I am almost certainly dead, and you have somehow discovered the secret of Eagle Rocks. The gold hidden with this letter was stolen from the Chiricahua Apache in 1852. I was part of that theft, along with my partner Stone Crow. At this direct accusation, Stone Crow surged forward. Lies. Give me that letter. Elias intercepted him, pushing him back. Let her finish. Sullivan stepped between them. Enough. Both of you back off. Let's hear the rest. Meadow continued reading, her voice steadier now. Stone Crow's brother, Running Wolf, discovered our plan and tried to stop us. In the struggle that followed, Stone Crow killed his own brother, though he later claimed I was responsible. We hid the gold here, intending to retrieve it when the search died down. But guilt has haunted me ever since. I cannot keep this blood money. She paused, taking a breath before continuing. I have fallen in love with a woman of the tribe White Dove. She does not know of my crime, and I cannot bear to tell her. Instead, I am leaving this confession and the gold for whoever might find it. If you are Apache, return it to your people. If not, I ask only that you use some portion to care for White Dove, and the child she carries, my child, who will be born never knowing their father. The rest should go back to the tribe from whom it was stolen. Meadow's voice faltered on the final lines. I am a coward running from my crimes rather than facing justice. But perhaps this confession can begin to make amends for the evil I have done. May God or whatever spirits watch over this land forgive me, William Fletcher. Silence filled the cave as the words faded. Meadow folded the letter carefully, her mind reeling with the implications. Her father had not simply abandoned her mother, he had fled from his crimes, from the guilt of theft and complicity in murder. Stone Crow's face had drained of color. The letter was devastating evidence against him, confirming what Ravenhawk had suspected, that he had killed his own brother and blamed Fletcher for the crime. It's a forgery, Stone Crow declared, but his voice lacked conviction. Fletcher wrote this to shift blame from himself. Then why hide it with the gold? Ravenhawk challenged. Why not destroy it? No, uncle. This is the truth you have hidden for 20 years. You killed my father and then persecuted Meadow to ensure your secret remained buried. Stone Crow's warriors were looking at their leader with new eyes, doubt and confusion evident in their expressions. The foundation of his authority, his supposed righteousness, his position as victim rather than perpetrator, was crumbling before them. Sullivan had been unusually quiet during this exchange, his expression guarded as he watched the confrontation unfold. Now he cleared his throat. The letter seems pretty clear. The gold belongs to the Apache tribe, and Stone Crow has some explaining to do when he returns. If he returns, one of the warriors muttered in Apache, a sentiment Meadow understood, though the others might not. Elias had been examining the gold while listening to the letter. Now he looked up, his gaze moving between Sullivan and Stone Crow. Something doesn't add up, he said slowly. This is a lot of gold, but from the descriptions I've heard over the years, there should be more. Much more. Sullivan's hand moved casually to rest near his holstered revolver. Gold gets exaggerated in the telling Blackwood. You know that. Maybe, Elias conceded. Or maybe not all of it made it into this hiding place. An uncomfortable silence followed this suggestion. Meadow looked at Sullivan with new suspicion. His knowledge of Eagle Rocks, his awareness of how much gold should be present, his convenient appearance at Riley's station, just as conflict erupted, it all pointed to a deeper involvement than he had admitted. Sheriff, she said carefully, how did you know to find us at Riley's station yesterday? It's not exactly on the main trail. Sullivan's expression hardened. Got word of trouble. Sheriff's job to investigate. Word from who? Elias pressed. We were the only ones out there besides Stone Crow and his men. The atmosphere in the cave had shifted, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. Sullivan's eyes darted between them, calculating. You know more than you're saying, Ravenhawk observed quietly. About the gold. About Fletcher. Sullivan's jaw tightened. Then, with a sudden movement, he drew his revolver. "Nobody move," he ordered, his voice cold and controlled. "Hands where I can see them." Elias froze, his own hands carefully visible. "What's this about Sullivan?" "Insurance," the sheriff replied, his gun unwavering. "While we sort out a few details." "You knew about the gold all along." Meadow realized the pieces falling into place. "That's why you were so interested in my necklace and the eagle tattoo." Sullivan's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. "Smart girl. Yes, I knew. Fletcher told me before he died. Not everything, not the exact location, but enough to know it was real. I've been searching for it for 15 years. "You found Fletcher?" Elias asked, surprised. "When?" "After you did," Sullivan admitted. "He wasn't quite dead when you left him. He held on long enough to tell me about the gold, about his partner in the tribe. Didn't mention Stone Crow by name, but gave me enough to start looking." Meadow's mind raced, processing this new information. "So all these years while you've been sheriff, I've been searching," Sullivan confirmed. "Following every rumor, every clue. Then Stone Crow started paying me to stay out of tribal affairs. I suspected he was involved, but could never prove it. And you," he nodded to Meadow, "you were the key all along with that necklace around your neck." "And now that we've found it," Elias asked, his voice steady despite the gun pointed in their direction, "what's your plan, Sullivan?" The sheriff's gaze hardened. "My plan is to take what I've earned after 15 years of searching. The tribe will get their share enough to satisfy justice. The rest comes with me." "That's theft," Ravenhawk said flatly. "That's life," Sullivan countered. "Nothing's ever clean or simple. You think the tribe would get to keep all this gold if I reported it officially? The government would swoop in, claim most of it for administration and protection. This way, everybody gets something." Stone Crow, who had been watching this exchange with calculating eyes, suddenly spoke. "Perhaps we can come to an arrangement, Sheriff. The gold split between us. The others need not leave this cave." The casual suggestion of murder hung in the air. Sullivan considered Stone Crow thoughtfully. "Tempting, but complicated. Bodies have a way of being found, questions asked." "Not here," Stone Crow insisted. "Not in this place that few know exists." Meadow felt cold fear wash over her. Sullivan was wavering, considering the tribal elder's suggestion. Beside her, Elias had tensed, ready to move despite the risk. "There's something you should know," she said quickly, drawing Sullivan's attention. "Before you make any decisions, you can't take back." Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "My mother didn't just give me the necklace," Meadow lied, improvising desperately. "She told people about it, about the map, about Fletcher's partner. If I don't return to tell them what we found, they'll know exactly who to blame." It was a bluff, but a calculated one. Sullivan was a lawman, corrupt perhaps, but accustomed to thinking about consequences, about evidence and witnesses. Uncertainty flickered across his face. "Who did she tell?" "People in Copper Creek." Meadow continued building on her fabrication. "People who knew my father, who knew you, Sheriff." Sullivan's expression darkened. "You're lying." "Am I?" Meadow met his gaze steadily. "My mother was very careful, very thorough. She wanted to ensure justice would be done even if something happened to me." The sheriff's resolve visibly wavered. His plan had been to find the gold, take his share, perhaps eliminate witnesses if necessary. But the prospect of predetermined suspicion of investigators already primed to look in his direction complicated matters significantly. While Sullivan's attention was focused on Meadow, Elias had shifted position slightly, angling his body to shield her if shooting started. Ravenhawk, too, had moved incrementally, positioning himself for rapid action. Stone Crow, sensing the sheriff's hesitation, pressed his advantage. "She is bluffing. Who would believe an Apache woman over a respected lawman? Enough people to make trouble," Sullivan muttered, "especially with a letter like that in the mix." He nodded toward the confession Meadow still held. The standoff stretched taut with possibility. Then, from outside the cave came an unexpected sound, voices approaching. Someone had followed them to Eagle Rocks. Sullivan's head turned slightly at the noise, his concentration broken for a crucial moment. Elias seized the opportunity, lunging forward to knock the sheriff's gun aside. The weapon discharged the shot, deafening in the confined space. The bullet ricocheting off Stone. Chaos erupted. Ravenhawk tackled one of Stone Crow's warriors as the man reached for a knife. Stone Crow himself dived for the gold-gathering pouches with desperate hands. The remaining warriors hesitated, caught between defending their leader and saving themselves. Meadow scrambled backward, clutching her father's letter, as Elias and Sullivan grappled for control of the revolver. The two men were evenly matched, both strong and determined, neither willing to yield. The voices outside grew louder, and suddenly new figures appeared at the cave entrance. Townspeople from Copper Creek, led by a tall man in a black coat, whom Meadow recognized as the owner of the general store. "Sheriff!" the man called, taking in the scene with evident shock. "What in God's name is happening here?" Sullivan and Elias froze in their struggle, both breathing hard. The unexpected arrival of witnesses had changed everything. "Marcus!" Sullivan acknowledged the store owner, still gripping his revolver, though it was now pointed at the ground. "What brings you and these good folks all the way out here?" Marcus stepped further into the cave, followed by 4 other men from town. "Followed you when you rode out with these strangers, and Stone Crow folks got worried, especially after what happened to Sheriff Jenkins over in Mesa Creek last month, ambushed and killed by renegades." Sullivan's expression tightened. The appearance of these townspeople had effectively ended any possibility of violence or theft without consequences. "Well, as you can see," he said, attempting to regain control of the situation, "things got a bit heated. We found some stolen property, and there was a disagreement about its rightful ownership." Marcus's gaze moved to the pouches of gold, some still clutched in Stone Crow's hands, others scattered across the cave floor. "That looks like more than just some property, Sheriff." "It's tribal gold," Meadow spoke up, stepping forward with her father's letter in hand. "Stolen 20 years ago. We came to return it to its rightful owners." Sullivan shot her a warning look, but it was too late. The townspeople were now fully engaged, curious and concerned. "Is that true, Sheriff?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting he had his own doubts about Sullivan's character. Sullivan hesitated, then slowly holstered his revolver. The fight seemed to go out of him as he recognized the futility of his position. "It's complicated," he admitted, "but yes, that's essentially correct." Over the next hour, the full story emerged, though with selective omissions on Sullivan's part regarding his own intentions. The townspeople examined the gold and Fletcher's confession with wonder and concern. Marcus, who appeared to hold significant influence in Copper Creek, took charge of documenting exactly what had been found. "This needs to be handled properly," he declared. "The territorial governor should be notified. If this gold was stolen from the Apache, it should be returned through official channels." Stone Crow protested, arguing that the tribe should take immediate possession, but he found little support even among his own warriors. The revelation of his role in his brother's death had shattered his authority. Ravenhawk, as the son of the murdered man, now commanded more respect from the warriors than Stone Crow himself. "The gold will be counted and held in Copper Creek until proper authorities decide its disposition," Marcus determined. And you, Stone Crow, have serious questions to answer about your brother's death. The tribal elder's face darkened with impotent rage, but surrounded by townspeople and abandoned by his warriors, he had no choice but to acquiesce. As they prepared to transport the gold back to town, Meadow found herself standing beside Elias at the cave entrance, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Elias gazed at the horizon, his profile strong against the fading light. "Justice, or something close to it. The tribe will get their gold back. Stone Crow will face his reckoning." "And Sullivan," Elias's expression hardened slightly. "His reputation won't survive this. Too many questions about what he knew and when. Marcus isn't a fool, he can read between the lines." Meadow nodded, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. So much pain had flowed from that original theft, her father's flight, her mother's solitary burden, Stone Crow's murderous secret, Raven Hawk's fatherless childhood, and her own persecution. The gold's recovery couldn't heal all those wounds, but perhaps it could prevent new ones. "And what about you?" Elias asked, turning to face her directly. "Where will you go from here?" The question caught Meadow by surprise, though it shouldn't have. With the immediate danger past and the mystery solved, she needed to consider her future. Return to the tribe. Seek a new life elsewhere. The possibilities stretched before her, uncertain but full of potential. "I don't know," she admitted. "The tribe might accept me now that Stone Crow's influence is broken, or they might still see me as an outsider." "You could come back to the ranch," Elias suggested, his voice carefully casual, though his eyes revealed deeper emotion. "Help me train those new horses, at least until you decide." The offer warmed Meadow in a way the setting sun could not. In Elias, she had found not just a protector or ally, but someone who saw her value, who accepted her completely. The connection between them had grown gradually but undeniably during their shared ordeal. "I'd like that," she said simply. His smile was brief but genuine, transforming his scarred face into something approaching handsome. Their moment was interrupted by Ravenhawk, who approached with quiet steps. "The gold is being packed for transport," he reported. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow." "What will you do now?" Meadow asked him. "With Stone Crow disgraced, you could take a leadership role in the tribe." Ravenhawk shook his head. "That is not my path, at least not yet. First, I must ensure my father's story is fully told, his memory honored. The tribe has lived with lies for too long." "And what of Meadow?" Elias asked. "Will she be welcome among the Apache now?" Ravenhawk considered this. "The tribe will be divided. Some will welcome her, seeing her as the instrument of truth and justice. Others will still fear what is different, what they do not understand." He looked directly at Meadow. "The choice must be yours. Return if you wish, but know that the path may not be easy." Meadow nodded, grateful for his honesty. "Thank you, Ravenhawk, for everything." He inclined his head slightly. "It was my honor to help fulfill my father's justice. And," a faint smile touched his lips, "to repay the debt I owed your mother." As Ravenhawk departed to rejoin the others, Meadow and Elias turned back to the sunset, now fading into twilight. The Eagle Rocks stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, their shape still powerful, still watching over the river as they had for countless years. "Your mother would be proud," Elias said softly. "You found the truth she protected all those years." "I hope so," Meadow replied, touching the bone necklace at her throat. "I wish I could have known what she intended." whether she wanted me to find the gold or just to understand my father's story. Perhaps both, Elias suggested. She gave you the tools to discover the truth when the time was right, when you were ready. The wisdom of this observation settled over Meadow like a warm blanket. Her mother had indeed prepared her in ways both obvious and subtle for the journey she had undertaken. The bone necklace, the eagle tattoo, the stories and skills she had passed down, all had led Meadow to this moment, to the truth, to a new beginning. The return journey to Copper Creek the next day was subdued but peaceful. The gold was secured in saddlebags, distributed among the townspeople, with Marcus keeping careful account. Stone Crow rode in silence, his defeat evident in every line of his body. Sullivan maintained his authority as sheriff, though the respect previously afforded him had noticeably diminished. In town, the discovery of the gold created a sensation. Telegrams were sent to the territorial capital and arrangements made for official representatives to come assess the situation. The gold itself was secured in the bank vault, counted and catalogued under the watchful eyes of multiple witnesses. Stone Crow was not formally arrested. Jurisdiction over crimes committed within the tribe remained ambiguous, but neither was he free to leave. The tribal warriors who had accompanied him now looked to Ravenhawk for guidance, a shift in allegiance that spoke volumes. 3 days after their return from Eagle Rocks, Meadow stood on the porch of the modest boarding house where she had been staying, watching the morning activity in Copper Creek's main street. The town had become a hive of activity as news of the gold spread, drawing curiosity seekers and officials alike. Elias approached, leading 2 saddled horses. His ranch had been untouched during their absence, and he had spent the previous day checking on his cattle and making arrangements for a longer absence. "Ready to go?" he asked, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. Meadow nodded, picking up her small bundle of belongings. She had said her goodbyes already to Ravenhawk, who would return to the tribe to share the full story of his father's death and the recovered gold. To Marcus and the other townspeople who had shown her kindness. Even to Sullivan, whose complex role in the events left her with mixed feelings. As she descended the steps, she noticed a familiar figure watching from across the street. Stone Crow, his face gaunt with defeat and rage. Their eyes met briefly, and Meadow felt a flicker of pity beneath her justified anger. The tribal elder had lost everything: his authority, his reputation, the respect of his people. His punishment would continue long after the official proceedings concluded. She turned away, mounting the mare Elias had brought for her. Some wounds could never be fully healed, some divisions never completely bridged. But she had found her own truth, her own path forward. They rode out of Copper Creek side by side, heading west toward Elias's ranch. The morning sun warmed their backs, and a light breeze carried the scent of pine and sage. After days of tension and danger, the simple act of riding freely across open country felt like a luxury. "What will you do with the ranch?" Meadow asked as they followed the familiar trail. "Now that the gold has been found, there's likely to be a reward. You could sell the property, move somewhere else, start fresh." Elias considered this. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll expand, buy more cattle, breed better horses." He glanced at her. "Depends on what future I'm planning for." The implication hung between them, delicate as a soap bubble filled with possibility. "And what future might that be?" Meadow asked softly. Elias was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. "One that isn't lonely," he said finally. "One with purpose, beyond just surviving day to day. One where the ghosts of the past can rest at last." It wasn't a declaration of love, they had known each other too briefly for that, but it was an opening, an invitation to explore what might grow between them, given time and nurturing. I'd like to help build that future, Meadow said, her voice steady, despite the flutter of her heart. If you'll have me. Elias's smile was slow but genuine, reaching his eyes and softening the hard lines of his face. I'd like that very much. They rode on in companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts, yet aware of the other's presence, the shared rhythm of their journey. The bone necklace still hung around Meadow's neck, no longer a burden of mystery, but a connection to her past, to her mother's wisdom and foresight. As the sun climbed higher, the landscape opened before them, rolling hills, patches of forest, the distant glint of the river. Somewhere ahead lay Elias's ranch, and beyond that a future neither of them could fully envision, but both were willing to explore together. Meadow touched the eagle tattoo on her shoulder, feeling its outline through the fabric of her dress. Once a mark of shame and confusion, it now represented something different. Heritage connection, a story that deserved to be remembered rather than hidden away. My mother used to say that we carry our ancestors with us in our blood and bones, she said, breaking the silence. That their stories live through us, whether we know them or not. Elias nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like a wise woman. She was, Meadow agreed. And I think she would approve of this journey. Not just finding the gold, but what comes after. Building something new from the broken pieces of the past. The metaphor applied to them both, Elias with his losses, Meadow with her divided heritage. Neither whole according to the world's judgment, but perhaps capable of creating wholeness together. As the ranch came into view in the distance, Meadow felt a sense of rightness, of coming home, though she had lived there only briefly. The small cabin, the corral, the barn, modest structures that nonetheless represented safety and possibility. They rode into the yard, dismounting by the corral fence. The horses nickered in greeting to their stablemates, and somewhere in the distance a meadowlark called its distinctive song. Elias took Meadow's bundle, his hand brushing hers in a touch that lingered. "Welcome home," he said simply. The words carried weight far beyond their literal meaning. Home, not just a place, but a state of being, of belonging, of acceptance. Something Meadow had sought all her life without fully realizing it. As they walked toward the cabin side by side in the golden afternoon light, Meadow knew that the journey that had begun with fear and flight had led her finally to where she was meant to be. Not to an ending, but to a beginning, one rich with promise and possibility, with challenges to face and joys to discover. The bone necklace at her throat and the eagle tattoo on her shoulder no longer marked her as cursed or different. They were simply parts of her story, elements of the complex tapestry that made her uniquely herself. And here with Elias, that self was enough, more than enough. It was valued, cherished, welcomed home. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.